with the weeks, the months, even the minutes leading up to that experience in crossing the border, I was filled with so many thoughts. What would happen at the border? What would they ask me? Would they ask to see proof of my status in the US? Would I be detained? Would they deny me admission? And if that happened, what was I supposed to do? Because once I leave the US, obviously I could not return. So I'm deciding to make this video to talk about that day. What went down, the documents they asked to see, what I was feeling, the questions they asked me, and overall what that experience was like. When I first applied for a study permit, I felt like a clown. I felt like I was straight up delusional for even thinking that I could go to Canada. I'll be honest here. I thought that it was a slim chance, close to none, that the moment that they read on my application that I was undocumented, they'd be like, nope, next, denied. But to my surprise, it was not denied. I was actually approved. And as I thought more about it, obviously the hardest part at that point was like, okay, it wasn't the getting into a Canadian school or getting my study permit approved, but it was actually the act of coming to Canada. That's the biggest barrier that I was facing at that time. As the date approached that I had to move to Canada for school, it became very, very, very daunting on me because, again, I didn't know what was going to happen. For all I knew, things could have gone south fast. Leading up to that moment, of course, so much went down, and if you want to know more about what that was like, make sure to check out my last two videos. But in this video, I want to talk about what happened at the border. Unlike most international students that come to Canada, I did not fly in. I arrived to Canada using the Blue Water Bridge that connects the state of Michigan and the province of Ontario. For reference purposes, it's about an hour northeast of Detroit, Michigan. When I was approaching the border, I had this idea that the border would resemble what the US Mexico border looks like because that's a border that I've seen. But to my surprise, the US Canada border in this particular area was not like that at all. I wasn't even unaware that we had arrived at the border because to me, it looked like another toll booth on a highway. Like we were just gonna pay our fee and then go along. There was no wait, there was no other passenger cars, there was only trailer trucks passing by. So when I arrived there, I was honestly thrown back because I didn't even realize we were at the border. That's how much unlike the Mexico US one this looked like to me. So we arrive at the border, and I'm pretty sure this officer thinks we're dumb because, like I said, we're clueless of the fact that we're at the border. And I say we because I forgot to mention my former best friend volunteered his time to drive me to the US so I wouldn't have to experience this whole thing by myself, which I appreciated. Anyways, so we get there, and I have to mention the 6 documents that I brought with me that I was required to bring to the border. The first one, of course, is my passport. My passport is the most important document, identification. Honestly, it's like the most valuable thing I can have possibly with me in Canada right now because it has been central to every single one of my applications. The next thing was an electronic travel authorization, but I will say that on February 29th of 2024 this year, Canada did make a change where Mexicans, we previously didn't need a visa to come to Canada, but now we do, which has put me in a really bad place, but that's a topic for another video. So at the time when I arrived to Canada, of course, back 2 years ago, I didn't need a visa, so I didn't have a visa. I had what was called, or what is called, an electronic travel authorization, and that's how I was able, that was like what permitted me to come into the country. The third thing, of course, was my study permit approval letter. I was so unprepared. I will tell you that. Okay, I won't spoil the story. I'll just leave it there. But my study permit approval letter. So that was the letter that I received after I submitted all my study permit application materials, and of course, it was approved. After that, I also had my acceptance letter from my university, to go along with that study permit approval letter. I also had to bring a proof of funds, which for me was in the form of a bank statement because, of course, if they asked me to see proof that I could support myself while being in Canada, I had to show that to them. And of course, at the time, because it was 2022, I also needed a negative COVID result because without it, they would not let me into the country. So we pull up to the little booth. We're at the border. We already said this person thinks we're dumb because we apparently didn't even realize we were at the border. He is so kind, which bless Bless his heart, because if he would have been mean or had a certain tone in his voice, I think I would have started crying, because I don't do well when I feel like people are mad or have really bad energy or really stressed around me. Yeah, so I am so grateful that he was extremely kind and very, very patient, because I was already on the verge of tears just because I was so anxious, so afraid. I didn't know what was going to happen. So I am so happy he was kind. That's all I'm going to say. So, of course, we pull up. He asks to see our passports or our documentation, identification and documentation. And at this point, I'm terrified. I am scared of what's going to happen, what he could say, what he could ask. So I just give him everything. I have a folder with all the documents I mentioned. I just hand it over to him. And he probably didn't need to get everything at once, but he gave it to him. So, of course, he stays quiet for like what feels like an eternity. He's just like reviewing. And then, of course, he looks back at us and he asks to pull our mask down, because, because of COVID, we had to wear face masks. So he has to pull it down so that he could, verify that we are the people on the documents. And after that, he proceeds to ask me, if he, well, now I see his routine questions, but at the time, I was being interrogated. Okay, but no, I wasn't. So he asked to see where I'm coming from, where I'm going, and I know these answers. I know these answers, of course, but because I was so nervous and so terrified of everything, I felt like I was lying. Like I wasn't, but I was like, am I lying? Like, girl, oh my goodness. Yeah. Anyways, so I'm like, when I get really nervous, so I feel like I'm about to cry, you can tell in my voice because I start cracking up. So I'm like, so I answered his questions, which were simple, but to me were like, oh my god, I'm being interrogated. What's going on? He's suspicious. He thinks something's up. I must be looking suspicious. Anyways, I'm spiraling. In my head, I'm spiraling. So then he asked to see my study permit, and I'm just like, this man probably, I'm pretty sure he thought I was so dumb, because he asked me that question and I was just like, and it was because in my head I was like, I already gave it to you. Like you have my study permit. Um, so it turns out, which I didn't know at the time. Again, I don't know what was going on. I didn't know what was going on. The study permit approval letter was an approval letter. It wasn't the study permit itself. You don't get the study permit, the official study permit, like mailed to you. You get that issued once you arrive in Canada in one of the ports of entry. So for me, it was there. So then he says, "Is this your first time in Canada?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, like yeah, this is my first time. I didn't just school here, blah blah blah." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And then he goes back to checking his documents. He asks me other questions, like I've had any relatives in Canada, things like that. So then he gives us all of our documents back, and he points to a building that's like right behind him. He says, like, pull over there and then go inside. So we get out of the car, we start walking to the office. Again, this border is empty. There's no one there. So we walk in, and all we see are some officers. They're just hanging out with each other. They're standing behind their desk. So that I walk in, we walk in, they see us. One singles me over, so I walk over there, and I'm not even sure what I'm doing. I have no idea what I'm doing, because the officer, he didn't tell me why I was going to the office. So I just started walking. I walk in, I give him, my documents, like my stack, because again, I'm not sure what I'm doing here. She looks at my passport, and then she says, "Okay, can you sit down over there, because she needs to review my documents." And I'm not sure again what's going on. So I proceed to do as what she tells me, and I sit down. And right in front of where I'm sitting are a bunch of open rooms, and my mind immediately goes to, we're about to get interrogated. We're gonna get separated. Me and my friend, they're gonna ask us questions. They're gonna think we're lying. They were trying to do something bad here. So I'm spiraling. Like my mind is going every possible place you can imagine. Gone. I'm freaking out. I'm trying to stay calm. I'm sweating. I am sweating. Anyways, after what felt like an eternity, she calls me over and she gives me my things back. And then she tells me that we just have to like drive away, and then points how to get out of there. And I'm just like confused at what just happened. I have no idea. So I look down and I see the study permit. That's when I realized what I had was approval wasn't the official document. That was just like a letter that I had to give them for them to give me my actual printed version. So then at that point, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. So, I calm down. We walk outside, we walk back to the car, and then we start, driving. And that's when I see for the first time the Ontario sign. And that's when I know that I'm in Ontario, like I'm in Canada. And that's when it really started to feel like, what just happened? What just happened? And as we began to drive, further into Canada, that's when I was like, whoa, how is it that a few minutes ago I was considered, undocumented in the US and now I'm an international student in Canada? I could not wrap my head around that concept. Like, how did this happen? Like, did I just do that? And I was so filled up with the excitement and happiness and emotion of what was going on that I was like, whoa, I can't believe this is happening. But of course, I crashed really fast a few days later after I was alone. And I realized that I was alone in a new country with not a single friend, not a single family member, trying to figure things out by myself. And that's when things get really sad, of course. But for the purpose of this video, that's what happened on the border.